television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like to tell me?
I like you.
I like you, my dear. Thank you very much for telling me that.
If you take all of the elements that make good television and do the exact opposite, you have Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Low production values, simple set, unlikely star. Yet, it worked.
Hello. I've always felt that I didn't need to put on a funny hat or jump through the hoop to have a relationship with a child.
He was always trying to get a message across in every show.
A week on death.
What does assassination mean?
On divorce.
Some people get married, and after a while, they're so unhappy that they don't want to be married anymore.
He was radical. I know everyone says that, but he was radical.
They didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
A neighborhood was a place where, at times that you felt worried, scared, unsafe, would take care of you.
He had a singular vision of kindness and love.
Love is at the root of everything. All learning, all relationships, love or the lack of it. Children have very deep feelings, just the way everybody does. There must be times when you do feel blue. I'm not feeling blue right now, though.
Me neither.
Won't you be my neighbor? Well, I suppose it's an invitation. It's an invitation for somebody to be close to you. The greatest thing that we can do is to help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. Won't you please, won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Welcome to a very special episode of the Monday Morning Critic. Today we have Francois Scarborough Clemmons. He's a writer, he's a singer, he's an actor, he's a professor. This man has lived a full life and continues to impact lives at every level. Francois, thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward very much to this. I'm excited.
So, Francois, let's talk about your early life here. So, Birmingham, Alabama, difficult early on? I don't know how long you were there for, because I knew you grew up in Ohio. But so put that in perspective for me, that early part of your life.
Well, I lived there until I was 5, between Birmingham and Tuscaloosa were the two cities where my parents got married and settled down. And 5 years old, my parents, my great-grandmother and grandmother, saw to it that we moved to Youngstown, Ohio. For many reasons, it was not advantageous for us to stay in the South because of the segregation, the discrimination. The racial problems were probably at the top of the list. But there were also problems with my parents' marriage was not going very well. And my great-grandparents thought maybe it might be better to be in a different environment entirely. And so that was part of the motivation. But I really feel like I got my basics in the South, and then the family just decided, let's get out of here. This is not going to work. They were farmers. They were, what do they call it? Sharecroppers. That's the word for it. And that was getting worse and worse and worse. You know, you have droughts, you have floods, hurricanes. You never really make a lot of money as a sharecropper, because not only does Mother Nature seem to be working against you, but the owner of the property has to be paid a certain amount off the top, paying for seeds to replant every year, and it was a never-ending cycle of losing. You were constantly just a little bit under profitable. You never became profitable in that. So they didn't see how they could make things happen continuing that way. So that was another motivation to get out of what we call the country and into the city, which is what ultimately brought us to Birmingham, which is early parts of the steel industry and wood furniture manufacturing and the wood sawmills. And then that inspired them from their perspective to want to be in the urban north, in Cleveland, Chicago, Pittsburgh, places, Detroit, the automobile industry. All of that was calling them to another possibility. So,
yeah, and I look at your life, and I read so many wonderful things, and I thought I read where you were a choir director at 10. I mean, are you the type of kid where you're self-driven at that point? You know what you want. You're the kind of kid that's probably a little bit ahead of his actual years. Is that a fair assessment of you as a younger boy?
Well, it is, except for the word driven. It came very natural.
Yeah.
And I was driven would be too nice a word. I was a busybody. I was in the choir, and thank God for Madeline. I can't think of Madeline's last name right now, but she was the choir director. And I used to sing the tenor part, the alto part, the bass part. And one day she said to me, "You're always singing everybody's part. You're such a busybody over there." I was 7, 8 years old. And she said, "Come over here next to me and sit down." And coming over there next to her, I guess she got to hear that I not only sang the parts, but I sang them accurately. I was a little kid. It was like a gift from the angels. The universe gave me this gift where I basically could hear it one time and I knew all the parts. So there were a couple of times when she said to me, "Sing with the altos, help those ladies out over there." It was a boy's voice, but it had quite a range. I could sing the boy alto, so I could sing with them. And then I'd be singing the tenor part, and then she'd say, "Okay, basses, let's go here." And I start mocking the basses. So I wasn't so gifted in the sense of driven I was going to do it. I was a busybody boy with, all the rest of the people in that choir at that time, they were basically adults. And there was little old me stuck up in there. My mother sang in the choir, and that was another reason I was there. And, I had a couple of sisters who also sang in the choir. So the family was there singing. And I was being a busybody.
Yeah, and musically, you've been blessed your whole life. Even to this day, you do a lot of musical. You're still very gifted and very blessed. It's not something that you ever lose. Is there any influences you? And I know you mentioned some early on as far as people that you knew. How about any of the people that are a little more well known? Is there any musical influence that just captures your heart that you totally pattern yourself after or totally are enamored with?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think Leontine Price, who sang at the Metropolitan 1961-62, in Il Trovatore, she made her debut at the Met. She would absolutely be probably my number one hero. She was the queen of American opera for years. And the first black prima donna, of the Italian Verdi, Puccini wing, doing Aida and other roles like that. So my first big hero was Leontine Price, and in many ways, probably Marian Anderson, who came along just before her, was the first black woman to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. She was also a hero of mine. So Marian Anderson and Leontine Price stand up there. I used to write special love letters to Leontine Price. I know she got sick of hearing from me, as a boy. I saw her on television. They had the NBC opera. They had what was it? Come on. There were several. They'll come to me in a minute. There were several opera programs that used to come on once a month, periodically. And when Leontine Price came on, Renata Tebaldi, Birgit Nielsen, those were the big stars. Richard Tucker, famous tenor. I listened to them. Also, I had a wonderful voice teacher named George Shirley. He was the first black man to win the Metropolitan Opera auditions in New York.
Wow.
And he became my mentor when I moved to New York, and I got to work with him for a number of years. He eventually left and went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and he was the head of the vocal music department there. And I'm still in touch with George. He's about 80-something years old now. And he's retired, and he was a wonderful mentor because we sang the same Fach, as they call it, the same repertoire, Mozart, and his voice was a little more what we would call dramatic than mine. So he sang some of the heavier repertoire that I would never, ever sing. But he still was a big influence. I used to go to his home in Upper Montclair, New Jersey. His wife was like she adopted me, and they always called me their oldest child. And I used to stay with them to get out of the city So George Shirley was, I felt it was important that I sing, not only study with a black man, but ask him some of the questions about the difficulties of classical music. There were no black male singers having a tremendous career at that time, except for George Shirley. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that. I must, be honest about it. That was Roland Hayes had come along, but he was mostly a concert singer back in the 1920s on through the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I certainly admired Roland Hayes a great deal because we sang, well, here we go again. I was a lyric tenor as he was, but he was primarily a concert singer on stage. And then there was Paul Robeson, who had been blackballed in the 50s with that McCarthy business because he wouldn't say that he wasn't a member of the Communist Party. That was a very controversial situation. So I knew all about Paul Robeson. I read, you could get books and read about these guys. They were our heroes if you wanted to be a classical singer. And Paul Robeson and Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson, they were my heroes in that way. But as I got older, Luciano Pavarotti, the Italian tenor, oh my God, what a beautiful voice. And I was fortunate enough to meet him in New York City. I was doing Porgy and Bess at the time. And I did a Porgy and Bess with the Cleveland Orchestra under Loren Mazel, was the American conductor who conducted that production with the Cleveland Orchestra and took us to New York. And we met a lot of very, very well-known singers. And Luciano Pavarotti was at a party, and he wanted to meet this tenor who had sang the role of Sportin' Life, because I interpolated some high D's and high C's so that it was not a typical Sportin' Life. Sportin' Life was a kind of spoken acting, dancing role. Sammy Davis Jr., I'm sure you're familiar, and Cab Calloway. Those guys had done it on Broadway. And with those guys, they were baritones. They were, pop baritones, and they sang Sportin' Life in a very endearing way, but they danced. I say 50% of their portrayal was as a dancer. So when Lauren wanted to do what George Gershwin wrote in the score, he was looking for a singer, and he settled on someone like myself. And I wanted to leave my stamp on the role, which is totally different than what they did. And I really, first of all, I really sang it as a tenor, not a baritone, and I added some high notes so that if future baritones came along, they would think twice about doing what I was doing. And I actually had a couple of them say that to me. Oh my God, what are you doing with interpolating here and interpolating there? But what it did was give those jazz singers and pop guys who could do it, it gave them license to do even more, but in the tenor range. So anyway, that wasn't quite what you were asking me about, who I admired and stuff. But in addition to Leontine and Marian Anderson and Paul Robeson, I admired Maria Callas, the great Greek-American singer. My goodness, I was so happy I got to see her before the end of her career at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And I've never been more deeply, deeply, deeply moved by an artist as I was by her. And after her, believe it or not, the next ones on my list were people like Nina Simone, who didn't have the voice, but good Lord, she had a message.
Yes, she's.
And I was writing all my love letters as a young teenager, and I got the opportunity to meet her when she came to Pittsburgh while I was in grad school, and I saw where she was coming downtown, and I wrote to her, and her management, he was her husband at the time, invited me to come downtown to hear a rehearsal and go backstage and meet her. And I think I walked off into heaven because she had a reputation for not being a very nice lady. She was a mean lady and mad. She was angry. In some reasons she did have to be angry, but other reasons it may have just been her nature. But she happened to adore this young man who was sending her all these stupid love letters. I think she must have thought I was silly because she was so nice to me. And I love telling that story to people because they hardly believe it. If you read her biography and stuff, you won't believe it either.
Francois, anyway. You talk about these wonderful trailblazing opera singers. I'm almost embarrassed that we don't know more about them. Like, how are their lives not more well known? And I mean,
well, let me just say, once I came to teach in Vermont, I really became aware of the fact that my students are very bright. I'm very proud of them. I love them very dearly. But I recognized early on that they filter news in America. We all do to a certain extent, first of all. But my students are about 90-something% white, and many of them come from upper class financial, as I'll say it that way, because they have other areas where they lack a great deal, but they're upper class financially. They tend to filter information about Black American history. And I wound up starting a course here specifically about the American Negro spiritual, which was basically a history and a cultural course going back into American history and sharing with my students the contributions of Black Americans to the larger history of America. My kids did not know their American history. They filtered it all the time, so much so that one of my class ran for 2 hours when we got together. I would add an extra hour, and the occasion would be that we would get together, and for an hour we would discuss history and political events that were happening in this country, hypothetically, that might involve the NAACP or Ralph Bunche or our Supreme Court justices, what Brown versus Brown was about, integration of schools, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They did not celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday in January when I came to Middlebury College. Now, there may have been some private acknowledgement. There were people who knew about him. I don't mean to imply that they didn't know what was going on. But there was no community consciousness of this great man and his contribution to all Americans. And I started a program up here with my class of singing spirituals and sitting around and talking, because I lived through the civil rights struggle in the 50s. Sure. I was born in 1945. So I was right there in the middle of it when they started the integration and the police and the dogs and the fire hoses and going across the bridge down in Selma, Alabama, all that. Jackson, Mississippi, those girls got shot, and later the Vietnam protests. And my students don't really have a grasp on that history and stuff. So we sit around, and that's what we would talk about until I got to the point where I would give them assignments. They said, this is supposed to be a music class. And I said, it is a music class, but musicians also have to be politically aware. Artists have to be politically aware, because people make laws that affect everybody. It affects budgets. It like what's happening in PBS and NPR with our present government slashing their operating budgets, and they're constantly begging for money. We have to know what's happening politically so that we vote, that we understand that our tax dollars, what they're being used for, and on and on. You do not live in a vacuum. So I got very much involved with my students in current events and the significance of not only someone like Dr. King, but what did it mean to have a black man running for president? And what did it mean about Obama and a first lady who was black? And two black children living in the White House. Those kinds of issues, my kids were a little bit lax. But once you opened the door, it was a flood. I used to have events in my home here, where the kids knew I was going to be cooking either some chicken or some ribs, or there was going to be food. So let's go over to Diva Clemmons' house. And that's where, the whole idea of you teach the whole student. You don't just teach them how to sing American Negro spirituals. You don't just teach 1 hour or 2 hours at a time.
Francois, I would have done anything to be in your class and to kind of pick. I really would have, because I work with kids too, and forget the fact. Don't forget the fact. Put aside the fact that most kids and many are. You're right. I mean, they kind of push out or phase out Black history, how do more people not know about or celebrate Medgar Evers? Like, how is he under the radar? I mean, like, come on. Like, it's just, I don't know, these... I would love a movie about these. Just getting back to your original point, these opera singers who are trailblazers. Like, how do we not know about? How do we not know about them? Like, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that I don't know that. I'm embarrassed.
It's an old tradition, and unfortunately, it goes back to during slavery when Black people could not take credit for their creativity, and when they were not allowed to read or write, and even the American Negro spiritual, the song. The body of these are great songs, which were very much appreciated in Europe. And when the first American singers, the Fisk Jubilee singers, 1880s, went to Europe and sang these songs, people were just amazed at this song repertoire because it's so significantly different than what they were doing. Now they do their Schubert and their Mozart and their Beethoven and their Bach and their Brahms. Great songs, Strauss. You'll never find better music, some of it based on folk song and some of it just created. But we have a uniquely American form of music, which is the American Negro spiritual, that we neglect. And it's because it's by Black people. It's from our slave experience. And we don't want to be reminded of the role that slavery has played in the economics of this country. We would not be America if we didn't have free labor on the backs of Black people. This is the truth. And that is what I talk to my students about. I'm not telling them this to make them feel guilty.
Right.
I'm telling them this so they know the truth. This is our country. This is who we are.
Right. Right.
And for 250 years, Southern plantation owners had free labor. They would buy another human being so they could undersell European cotton and European products that they would make. America could always make it of excellent quality, cheaper.
Right. Right.
And that's how we became a huge world industrial power, by underselling Europe. And we got a lot of our raw coal and all, not just from America, but from Africa. We mined Africa to a fairly well, and we brought it not only to Europe, but to America. So understanding your history helps you to understand what this country is, who this country is, and then you begin to understand why students don't value the contributions of Black people. Because for all of this time, they were told it's insignificant. Right. They've never made any contributions to American history, which is not true.
And when teachers don't mention it to them, they make it insignificant. You're right, and
that's right.
We do have one glimmer of hope, and I'm not, and it's modern day. It's the success of Black Panther, and I know it's not the same as what you're saying. I get that, but I mean, we have people going to the movie theaters to support. We have people that are African American that can look at a screen and see somebody that's like them. We have people that are Caucasian that can look on a screen and see somebody that's African American and love them for who they. I mean, I'm not trying to make it go over the top with this, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe that's a glimmer of hope for the future. I'm trying to find something.
I think you're absolutely right. I went to see it 4 times, and if it were still downtown, I'd go see it again. I have rarely been more moved by all the things that you're talking about that this film addresses itself to just by its existence, and the fact of our society today, and many of the problems that we have are dealt with by the existence of this movie. I'm very, very grateful to the directors and to the actresses and actors and to the story. I can't wait for the sequel. I can't wait.
Yeah, top to bottom, great actors. And Michael B. Jordan, who plays the quote-unquote villain in the movie, had a great quote, and I said this before. He said, I wish the 10-year-old version of me, could have seen this.
Could have seen that movie.
Yeah, he would have been so proud. So, yeah, I mean, I think hopefully this is a glimmer of hope. Hopefully we're trending in the right direction.
I totally agree. And it seems like we have to have a tremendous barrier. We have to have a real something driving us before we do things like this. I'm thinking of the day after this man who's in the White House now was inaugurated, all those women who came to Washington. And last 2 weeks ago, you had all these children coming to Washington. And you have these seats that are being flipped from red to blue, things like that. And you have things like Black Lives Matter, and it's my turn, or then you have a movie like this coming out of this kind of turbulence and turmoil in our society. There are lots of reasons to be optimistic, because a lot of people who are asleep, as I call it, are awake. I don't know how much of my Facebook website you read, but I encourage people to stay awake. We cannot be asleep now, because there's so much going on. I compare the times we're living in now to when Vietnam was here, because I was there during the Vietnam War, and in my opinion, the young people were the ones who said, we will not go. We will not go and fight this unjust war. And it was a huge objection against being drafted to go over there and fight a war that was not justified. And it was not our war, I feel. And it didn't threaten us. And, these people were not at our doorstep putting us unjustly in jail and things like that. And there were many kids who were conscientious objectors, and some were defectors, and some went to Canada. All manner of ways not to share in that disaster. It was very painful. But it was not the older people, because I don't know if you know much of that history, but President Johnson was so distraught by the objections and the crowds that gathered to protest that he would not run for a second term.
Right.
And there are all kinds of other people and peace candidates, McCarthy and what have you, but young people led that revolt. And I have a lot of confidence that the young people, not just the ones coming out of Florida, but all over this country, are stepping forward and saying, enough is enough. You guys haven't done it, and we have to raise our voices, and we must stand up and we must be counted. I wondered what would happen, because it seems like so many of the millennials, the newer generations, were not interested. They didn't care. But they certainly have found the fire in the belly right now.
Yeah, that's really well said. And we talk about special people doing special things. I introduced you as all these things, and I never included Grammy Award winner. Like, I would think that would have been part of my introduction. But I wanted to ask you, you founded the Harlem Spiritual Ensemble. Talk a little bit about that, Francois.
Well, Fred Rogers sent me around America. I talked with him about the fact that I felt a lot of people around America loved Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but not Black America, because they felt it was too white, that it was the kind of show that was very popular on public broadcasting stations. And these stations were usually in white communities or on campuses or places like that, and not in the Black community. But I wanted more and more Black people to know about this great man who had started this program, and why, and what his principles of life were. So I started doing some children's concerts at daycare centers in New York City. And to make a long story short, someone asked me to do one at Lincoln Center, of all places. And during the concert, in walked Fred Rogers.
Wow.
Well, he saw what I was doing and saw the people that were gathered there, and it made a deep impression on him. And he asked me, would I be willing to go on a tour and do the same thing? And of course, I said yes. And when I went around the country, I talked with lots of people. I also had a chance they would frequently invite me to come and hear us do Handel's Messiah or Bach's oratorio of some kind, that kind of thing. And I said, why is there no American professional organization dedicated to American Negro spirituals, our original folk music? It was all European. Nobody had an answer for me. And one day I was in my living room in New York City, and I said, when you see a problem, sometimes it's a sign you have to fill the need. You can't expect someone else to be that person. I asked several people whom I considered first-class musicians, better than me, I felt. They were far more qualified. I never took a conducting course in my life. I didn't take an arranging course. I'm a singer, I thought. And I thought I would be, singing in opera houses and operas and all that sort of thing. I felt vastly unqualified. However, I'm the only one who kept complaining about it. So one day I said, call a few people, get them together, tell them, cook a little dinner, make it sweet and nice, and then tell them what you want to do and see how they respond. And as life would have it, they responded very positively. I had about 10 people at my house. And we nailed it down and we started rehearsing. I got some music together. And I was amazed that how many people felt the way I did, but did not feel that they could be the leader, the energy that propelled this organization forward. So I wound up a reluctant director, very reluctant. And I every now and then when I first started the group, I used to ask them, do you still think I should be the leader? Don't you think someone else should be? And they said, no, it's you. You do it. We will follow you. You're doing, they encouraged me, you're doing a fine job. Well, it involved a lot of behind the scenes organizing and calling people. And I eventually did, in the beginning, you do your own publicity. You call people and arrange for singing engagements. And I'll tell this real quick. You don't want this long answer, but I had saved some money for retirement. And people would come to rehearsals, and then they would say to me, I'm sorry, but I don't have a babysitter tonight. And I would say, bring the baby with you. Or they would call and say, my mother is sick, or my brother is sick, or my uncle, or something has come up that I have to do. And I thought, this is not going to work if people don't come to rehearsals. So I took that money, and I decided, I talked to Fred, as well as some of my other consultants, what the heck to do to get people to commit to rehearsals, because you can't get the arrangements nailed down if people don't show up. And I wound up paying everybody to come to rehearsal for like 6 months, 8 months.
Wow.
It was an agreed upon amount. And I have to say this to you, that sacrifice was well worth it. There's so many advantages to putting that group together that came about when I decided to make that ultimate sacrifice and pay everybody. Not only did I pay them for rehearsals, but our first engagements were for churches and community centers and daycare centers and schools that wanted us to come and sing. I mean, if they had $100, and I don't mind telling you, $100 does not go very far if you've got 6, 7, 8, 9 adults. So I also made the decision that everybody, at first I said everybody will get $25 and per every time we sang, and after a while I said, okay, we'll get $50. And that's how I got the members of the ensemble to commit. And it was an amazing transformation to see them commit to being in this organization. And we used to put money in a kitty, so we'd work up and save money to continue the organization, because you got to get you have to get outfits to wear that look nice, and the ladies had to have earrings, get their hair done, and heels. There were all kinds of things that come up that you don't think about when you have to take taxis, and when you when you have to. There are all kinds of traveling expenses. They were just. I had not anticipated any of this stuff. We were not under management at that time. It was just me working out of my living room, and I didn't really have a decent office in New York. It was a small apartment. But I persevered. They persevered with me. They took ownership for making it happen. And the next thing you know, we sang for an agent in New York City, and that agent started booking us at colleges and universities. That was our first major venue. It seemed that they were very, very happy with the songs and our arrangements. And here we go again. To save money, I started doing my own arrangements because we couldn't afford to hire someone else to do the arrangements. So necessity made me into an arranger. And it was one thing after the other. But after about 5 years, we were a force to be reckoned with. My members had grown strong, and they were confident. They were so capable. They were inspiring. And sometimes after that point, but it took a while, I assure you. I would be on stage in Vienna or on stage in Berlin, or even we went to Seoul, South Korea, where they had the Winter Olympics. We were over there about 10 times singing.
Wow.
It's a very strong, powerful Christian community in Korea, and they wanted us over there. We made recordings over there and appeared on television, and it was very popular in Europe and in South Korea.
Yeah, and giving of yourself, you're no stranger to that. I mean, that's the theme of your life. I mean, you're a trailblazer. You're a very giving person. You know, you're the first African American to be a major part of a children's show. For people who don't know, obviously you were Officer Clemmons in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, one of the, if not the best shows of all time.
Well, I'll say unequivocally is the best children's show of all time.
Well, you know, I find myself watching it. I was watching it well into my 20s, and I got to tell you. So I'm going to break this down. We had a conversation off air a little bit. I'm researching your life, and I love everything I'm reading and looking at. And then there's a trailer for a movie that's coming out that I stumble on. And
yes,
I have to tell you, Francois, I had to put down my iPad, and I proceeded to. The tears were rolling down my face for I want to say 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, I can't do it. I just can't do it. So it was the beautiful work that you've done, all of you have done, and for not just thousands. We're talking millions of kids that. Many of whom had no father, had no family. You guys raise kids. You guys have, and you've mentioned it early in the interview, these beautiful souls, and I'm in love with that.
Well, I have to tell you that Fred Rogers really is the backbone of all that stuff you see, because I have to confess, when I first started doing Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I was doing it to make a check. I was in graduate school and I had to pay bills. It was a job. And it took me a while to understand my calling in this context of working with this man who was dedicated to the lives of children. I thought I was going to go to the Metropolitan Opera and sing and be the next Luciano Pavarotti or something like that. I had no idea of the fact that 50 years later, I would still have this reference point to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But I think we all have a calling. Fred was anointed to do his ministry to children on television. And I, too, have a calling, but mine is to sing and to sing spirituals and to serve. I see myself as a person who serves the community all over the world, not just in Pittsburgh. His calling is specifically on television. Mine is on stage. And we talked about that. And I feel that I do my best work when I'm actually physically on stage. And because Fred was shy, he's the introvert, I'm the extrovert. And I love being on stage. I had to learn what it meant to communicate the way he does in the television studio. That did not come naturally to me. And what I like to do now is have people film me as though they are not there. I don't pay them any attention. And that's how I feel it works best for me. But doing that show helped to open up something inside of me, because I love people. I love children. But I never quite realized that was a calling. You know what I'm trying to say? I felt that it was less important to work with children than it was to work with an adult audience. And that simply is not true. They opened my eyes to that. And when I went to teach here at Middlebury College, I thought it was a big deal that I was teaching, I was conducting. And what I learned talking with Fred Rogers, that the most important thing I did when I came here was adopt my children. And work in their lives. Yes, what was happening in the classroom was important. I was getting a check for it. But outside of the classroom, there were so many situations where I saw my role as a parent, as a mentor, that I would sit at home sometimes and say, this is why I was born. I was born to be a parent. Because, you're a gay man, you have no biological children. I don't have a partner. And I've still felt complete and whole as a person, but I thought, I still want children in my life. And this is how God fulfilled that need to parent. You know how they talk about the poor little rich kids?
Right.
I found them.
Oh, that is so beautifully said. And, Fred hears you in a church. And if I'm wrong, and with any of this, Francois, please tell me. He approaches you in a church. He hears you. He says, you know what? I think, I got a role for you as a police officer. And your track record of, how you grew up, the time you grew up, you're not too fond of, not you, but like the police aren't like, they're not exactly role models in your life as you were growing up and as the situation unfolded. So what?
Well, you're basically right. I am a ghetto boy, and the police have a reputation for not being the kindest guys on the block. Just a couple of days ago, in California, they just killed that man, and you could just go on and name all the places, St. Louis, and where they shoot unarmed black boys who they think they're lunging for a gun, and they're reaching for their telephone, or they're reaching for some candy or something incredibly ridiculous, and they shoot them, and they're lying there. They're shot in the back, and they search them, and what do they have? Some tibbles or something in their pockets. And the police said, I thought he was reaching for a gun. They have no criminal record frequently, and they're teenagers, 18, 19, 17 years old. It was vicious like that when I was a boy. You did not mess with the policemen, and they were the last people I thought of as helpers. Yeah. So when Fred presented that idea to me, yes, I was singing in the church, and he heard me, and he wanted me to come on the program. But to sing, to become Officer Clemmons was weird. I mean, I thought, Fred, no, I don't want to be a police officer. I don't want to be what they represent. And he said, you can change that image. You can have an effect on many, many people who will think positively about policemen. Francois, think about that. I had never thought about that. And I don't have a whistle. I don't have a billy club. I don't have a gun. I don't know karate or judo. I can't do anything but sing a song. We used to laugh about that all the time. I'm a policeman. All I can do is sing a song.
That's great. That is so great. And there's a moment, and this is what sent me over the top in my research as far as emotionally. There's a special moment you guys have in 1969, and then you have it again later with a child's pool. And I remember seeing this, and obviously,
yes.
And it I don't know. It's like kind of like the way I looked at it. It's kind of like being in this emotional ocean. I was just floored by it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just over the top again, but it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. And people, before you explain what it was, people assume, and maybe me too, as a child. When I watch it, you see one thing. You see these beautiful characters, puppets, and this wonderful man, this wonderful police officer. But as you get an adult, you're like, this guy was like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. He was so smart. He had people doing what he wanted, and he was brilliant. So before you get into that, please talk about that moment in 1969 and later when the show ends in 93. But it's one of the best stories I've ever read in any research article.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you very much. It makes my heart go, first of all, and I still think about Fred, and I think about his brilliance and the experiences that he has brought into my life, which is what made me want to sit down. I'm writing a book about that and other experiences that I had with Fred, because he was like a surrogate father for me. So when he suggested doing that, I thought, well, yeah, but I think I was the last one to get on to what he was really trying to say, because I was so close to him as a human being, just as a friend. I had spent Thanksgiving at his home. I knew his wife. I knew his two sons. There were, issues in my life that I knew I could discuss with him, not only just being gay, but the financial problems I was having, the discrimination that I ran into in the opera world. There were many personal issues like that I could discuss with Fred. And there were a couple of them where he opened the door and he made a phone call on my behalf. But when he wanted to do that, I thought it was just something for children. The little kids sit out there with their feet in a tub like that. And it's not something I would be inclined necessarily to do. But on the children's program and with Fred, I thought, and this song, when I started singing it, and people ask me to sing it now, and I can't remember the words. I know the song very well. I just don't remember it vividly enough that, I don't sing it impromptu. I have to go and get the music and all that stuff. Anyway, I was a little bit surprised when I, got settled in there and we were talking very casually. And then I sang this song, which I think is very beautiful. And we were just expressing our friendship. That's how I saw it, just expressing our friendship. But then when I got ready to get out of the tub there and he started helping me dry my feet, I began to feel another dimension of what we were sharing. And that dimension, because I know the Bible very well. I went to a seminary myself. I'm an ordained pastor. I went click. Oh, something else is going on here. Because we really hadn't discussed the biblical significance of Jesus washing Peter's feet.
Yep.
And the saying, you are my, you cannot be my disciple if I can't wash your feet. Well, all of that began to go through my mind in that first time, and I thought, oh my God, this has an incredible liturgical meaning, because Peter was the rock, and Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Well, I really had a lot of thinking to do after the first time. And so I went and I chatted with Fred afterwards. We had many conversations that had a specific biblical source: the prodigal son, the role of women in the church, the early church, Paul's role, the things that he said. There were many things that Paul said that are very controversial, opening the church up to the Greeks and the Gentiles and things like that. So I began to understand there was a biblical context to the fact that this man washed my feet in as they did in the Last Supper in the upper room before he was crucified. And the part of it was that it was a black gay man who represented Peter. And I don't think that was a mistake or casual or an accident or happenstance. I think it was profoundly deliberate on Fred's part. He was not a spontaneous person who did things in a casual, easy manner like that. He knew what he was doing and what he was saying.
Absolutely.
So much so that, as you say, in 92, he has to repeat it. And I don't think he would have repeated it. He would have said, oh, that's enough. Let's move on.
And for those,
he was sending a message.
Yeah, and Francois, for those that don't know what we're saying, the two of you were sitting in like a child's pool, like a little plastic, pools they sell at, toy stores. The two of you had your feet in, and you had sang a song in '69, and it was just such a wonderful moment. And even on the surface, without getting, and you're right with the depth you're talking about, but even on the surface, many kids to see a white man and a black man just sharing that moment
exactly
is just beautiful. Like
exactly. There's so many levels in which this experience reached into the heart of America. That's how I see it. I had adults over the years. That's the one scene they talk about. And the thing that they talk about is the effect that scene had on racism in their homes, in their communities, in our culture. Because to me, the wound of America is racism. We have not healed that wound.
Nope, you're right.
And the fact that Fred Rogers was trying to say something without banging people over the head with a hatchet had a very profound effect. I've had people come up to me and say our family was having a quarrel. They were teaching us to be prejudiced against black people. This is a white man was talking to me. And he said, I was saying to my parents, no, my friend is black and I like my friend. There's nothing wrong. He's not, my parents are saying, but he's different. He's inferior. He's not this, he's not that. And somewhere in that context, this show came on and there was Fred Rogers, and it progressed where I came in and we sat down together with our feet in the water, and the whole family was mesmerized. They stopped and they watched this program. And when that program finished, that was the end of that conversation.
And when he does it to you in, he's hanging up his sweater on the very last, I think it's the last episode, and he says to you, you make every day special just by being you, and I like the way you are. And he's looking at you.
Yes.
And then you ask him, were you talking to me? And do you remember his reply to you?
Yes. He's been talking to me for 2 years or 3 years, but I finally heard him today.
That might be the best quote I have ever heard.
I can't tell you how. Now you're going to make me start crying because I deeply, deeply love him. And I have to tell you, it was the first time a man told me that he loved me in a way that was wholesome and healthy and meaningful, so that I knew that my self-worth, I was so empowered by his truth that it has stuck with me for all these 35, 40 years after that, because my father was not a man who could express it. My stepfather was abusive and mean, and I was getting away from him. And so I was 24 years old before I really heard a man say to me, you make every day a special day, and I love you just the way you are. And then we were in the studio, and there were other people there, but I felt this energy coming from him directly to me that day because I was finally awake. And then he says to me, yes, I was talking to you. I have been talking to you. Oh my God, that you finally heard me today. That's just one example of his profound gift for patience and for, he made all of us feel like that he's trying to reach the deepest part of us, inside. He was not a superficial man.
Francois, as a man of 40 plus years old, I watched this show and it says the neighborhood of make-believe. And the joke's on us because there is nothing make-believe about what Fred Rogers was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. And thank God he did what he did, because this man is... Will we ever see a Fred Rogers again?
No, I don't think so.
I think you're right. And we might not see another Francois Scarborough Clemmons either. So,
well, but and the other thing, things are very active because of the 50th anniversary and the fact that he just turned 90, if he had been alive. But the fellowship on Facebook in particular is getting older and older and older and older. They're not all 3 and 4 and 5 years old. I've got a couple of letters here from adults who are writing and asking for autographs and stuff. And
wow,
I'm very happy. That doesn't bother me. There's nothing negative about it. It's just that, ordinarily you think that the children, because it's a children's television program, but now parents are writing and grandparents are telling me their stories as well. So that's why I said I need to write this book. So I sat down and I started writing because...
You realize you're coming back on the show once the book is released, right? You're
well,
it's a 2-offer deal. You have to come back.
Well, of course I'll come back. I'll be glad to come back. I'm not impossible to get to. I just have to clean my schedule. All these little appointments going here and going there and doing this and doing that. I just clean it up.
So, Francois, I mailed a letter today, and thank you so much for giving me almost an hour of your time. I mailed a letter today. I went to the post office, and son of a bee, when I get to the counter, there is a Fred Rogers stamp that they just released. I'm like, what?
They came out last week.
Yeah, and I was like, this man will... here I am in my 40s. No matter where I go, this man is always, and you too, are always a part of my life. And it's like, I don't know, the influence... Don't you never feel that way, Francois? That and I know that you started off in one track and you end up in another. You never feel, and you just mentioned, autographs and so forth, that you've influenced kids. That little scene in the pool, how many thousands of families' perspectives you might have changed on both sides of the racial issue. You never think about that?
Oh yeah, I do, and I do because people are very honest and very straightforward, and they do tell me. I'm not a shy person, and I'm not unapproachable. And it happens here in Vermont. To be very honest with you, I could probably walk all over this state, and everybody in the state would know me from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's one of those. And they talk to me. They tell me stories standing at the counter. I want to pay for my groceries. They go home. and they start telling me this and telling me that. They have stories. Also because Captain Kangaroo lived in Brattleboro up here in so we have the Brattleboro influence and Mr. Rogers together, and it's just amazing. People tell me wonderful, wonderful stories. There's never bad stories. I'm very happy to hear the stories, believe me.
Yeah, and no matter how people, the image they have of you or the image they have of Fred Rogers, no matter what they think, it's always better. No matter how well people speak of you guys, it's always at another level. The impact you guys have will be felt for generations.
Well, we're very blessed. I feel very blessed. I feel that I, too, have a calling. And I always say it was no accident that I met Fred Rogers. No accident that we shared this journey as much as we did together physically. But, the last part I'll say here is I still feel that I have communication with him. It's one of those things where, you have dreams where I see him, and when I'm meditating, I feel like I commune with him. And since I started writing the book, which I'm almost finished with, I really feel that he helped me write the book. He gave me some ideas on what to write on, and I think about him and another incident that we had in real life. And I said, you want me to write on that? I said, okay, well, let me go to the desk and make some notes, and then when I sit down and write, I really mean it's almost like you have I heard Joanne say this to someone else in another interview, and of course she was his wife for some 47, 48 years, that she still feels that he's around. He's not gone anywhere.
No.
So that's pretty exciting, to be quite honest. I have a deeper feeling for the reality of afterlife since he died than I did even before. And he's not the only one, but he's the main one.
That's well said. And I kind of think the same. I mean, I don't know him like you did, but I always wonder, what would Fred Rogers think of, bullying right now for kids has reached an outrageous level. And I wonder what he would have thought of that, how he would have... I mean, I know he would have conquered it with kindness and compassion, but I wonder how he would have directly approached it in his own way.
Yeah, I can't speak for him that way yet either, but I do know that it would have disturbed him, and it would have been something that he would want to be a helper to make it better. And so that a lot of times, someone else was saying it, but Oprah was saying something like this the other day. You want to try to find out what happened so that, why the bully is bullying. And so you'd want to go back to that point where the bully was hurt or the bully was rejected or somebody bullied the bully and set up, a pattern. You'd want to go back to say, well, what happened? When? Why are you like this? Because a lot of times you can do that, and you can go back, and by going back, you help that person to understand some bad choices that they may be making or bad choice they made, and thereby letting them know that they're all right. They can be all right just by being themselves. This aggressive negativity, it's just not there. It's not the answer. You don't have to go there.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll ask you, and I never realized he gave a commencement at Middlebury. Am I right with that? He did.
Oh yes. Oh my Lord. They still talk about that. I mean,
it's on the website. It's Francois. It's on his word for word. His transcript is on the Middlebury website, which I thought was so cool.
Well, they told me it's the most requested graduation ceremony that they've ever had. Out of all of them, they've had all kinds of people here speaking and sharing, and that there are people who come here and say, can we hear that, the Mr. Rogers, can we read it or whatever? I don't know if they have a videotape of it, but I do know they have the transcript and everything. But that's the one that people ask for. And I was surprised, to be honest with you, but very happy about it, because I invited him up here and I discussed it with the president of the college at the time, and he said, yes, please be the point man for us to get him to come to, and he did it to keep a promise to me. He promised he'd come visit. I had been to visit him 3 or 4 times, and more than that. And I said, Fred, you haven't been up to Vermont to see me. Would you please come? And he said, yes, I will come to see you.
That is awesome. Francois, is there anything you wanted to promote? You've given me an hour of your time. Is there anything you wanted to get out there?
Well, the only thing I want to get out there is that I'm writing a book that I want everybody to buy. I'm looking for a publisher. If anybody knows, I've read all the stuff about self-publishing, and that's not my route. I want Norton or one of the big names to call me up and say, we want to publish you, Mr. Clemmons. We think that that's a book that should be out there.
Oh, I'm confident it will get out there. A publisher will be found. His name is Francois Scarborough Clemmons. You are a hero of mine. I like you even more. I don't think that's possible after talking with you. Thank you so much for having a big heart, influencing millions of kids, and just being just a great soul that you are.
Well, thank you, and be in touch with me, and I look forward to getting a copy or something at your convenience, at your time, and you've been a great host, I'll say, interviewer.
Thank you, Francois.
There are many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say I care about you. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you. There's the singing way to say I love you. There's the singing something someone really likes to hear. The singing way, the singing way, the singing way to say I love you.
Cleaning up a room can say I love you. Mm-hmm. Hanging up your coat before you're asked to do it. Drawing special pictures for the holidays and making plays.
You'll find many ways to say I love you. You'll find many ways to understand what love is.